Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we are diving into Azure policies and how to set them up with exclusions. If you are managing cloud resources at scale, you know how important it is to ensure compliance and governance. Azure Policy is a fantastic tool to help with that. But what happens when you need a certain resource to be exempted from the policy? That's where exclusions comes in. By the end of this video, you'll know how to set up Azure Policy and exclude specific resources from its scope. Let's get started. Before we jump into the whole setup, first of all, let's find out what Azure Policy is. Azure Policy is a governance service in Azure that allows you to create, assign, and manage policies that enforces different rules and effect over your resources. These rules ensure resources stay compliant with corporate standard and regulatory requirement. For example, you might want to enforce that all your storage accounts have encryption enabled or restrict VM size in certain environment. But for sometimes certain resources need to be excluded from the main policies. So that's where exclusions comes into play. And we're going to cover exactly that. So let's first of all jump onto the Azure portal and get started. So now we're in the Azure portal. Let's go to policies. So in the search section, we can search for policy and then select policy. In a policy, click on compliance and then click on assign policy. So this is where you set up the scope. So in terms of this, for the subscription, you select the subscription and then you can then proceed to set up your exclusions, right? So for what I'll do, I'll select, let's say, one resource as an exclusion. So to do that, I will use a resource group. So I'm just going to type in coffee test. And this is where I'm going to create an exception. And then you can go even further down by going into the resource type as well, right? But I'm just going to use the resource group. So that means in the future, if I create a new resource in this specific resource group, it's still going to be exempted from this specific Azure policy, right? So I'll select that. And then once you are done with what your selection, then you can proceed to click on save and then yes to confirm. So creating an exclusion for this resource group. Then you can proceed further down where you set up your policy. So in terms of the policy, I'm just going to set up a policy for allow locations. So I'll just type in locations. So what this one will do is that it's only going to allow creation of resources in that specific location. So, but there are many different types of policies that you can actually leverage when it comes to Azure policy. But as a test, I'm just going to use allow policy location and then going to restrict the creation of resources in just one specific region on Azure. Right. So once you select that, then you can add. Then you can give it a description just to make it more meaningful to what the policy is. But this is just a test, so I'm just going to leave that out. And then you can click on next. So this is the section where you define your policy. So for allow location, you can then select which location you want this to apply to. So I'm just going to set this as East US only. You can add multiple of these regions if you like to. But I'm just going to set this to East US. So that means for creation of resources, it's going to allow the creation of this resource only in East US. For already existing resource, they will not be in compliance. So after we create this, it will analyze all the resource environment and determine the ones that are not in compliant and highlight those to you. So that means you can proceed to follow the remediation steps, but it's not going to enforce this policies to existing policies. Only policies that you create after this, that's when you'll be prevented from creating those resources. So once you have that selected, you can proceed to select next. For the manage identity session or remediation session, I'll leave that one out for now. And then I'll click on next. And if you have any specific message, so if your organization would like to see a specific message when setting up policies or resources are not in compliance, then you can put that information in here. All right, so I'll click on next, and then I'll review whatever I've is created, and then I'll click on create. And now it should create the policy. So I already have 2 existing policies. The one I just created, I can refresh this, so hopefully it should show up momentarily. All right, so let's give it a few minutes or two. Right, here you go. So now, as you can see, allowed location has been created successfully, and you can analyze it. When you click on it, it's currently running through analysis to identify resources in the environment, the ones that are compliant and ones that do not comply. So after that, you notice that it will show the ones in comply as green and the one not in comply to this specific policy we just created as a non-compliance in red. So I'm just going to give it a few more minutes and see if it will show that information. I'm just going to refresh the page as well. So as you can see, still nothing coming up, but let's give it a few minutes. But whilst we're waiting, what we're going to do is we're going to create a resource that is outside the scope of this resource policy. So to do that, I'm going to create a VM. So I'm just going to search for virtual machine, and I will proceed to create a virtual machine. All right, so first then, when I select a resource group that is not currently allowed, so let me just type in allowed test resource group. As you can see from here, that region is not East US, so it will give me a message that not allowed location. All right, but if I select East US, so if I go ahead and select East US, that message goes away. But if I select any other region that is not part of what is in my allowed policy, right, then I get a message in red that it's not allowed based on the policy that I've set up, right? Even if I proceed, so for example, if I proceed to create this, just checking the rest of the data. All right, so that's in order. So if I proceed to review and create, a deployment recommendation that is making me aware that there are other regions I can create this resource successfully at because I'm not in compliance. But if I ignore this, I still have a message here that validation failed and set information are missing. So if I go back to this, right, you see that recommendation instance there, but I cannot create that resource in this specific region. So if I switch it up again, it will analyze the region where that resource is, and I will still run into the same error message. So if I click on this, ignore that, still get the validation fail. And they ask me to check to view the details. When I click on this, I'll get more information. So as you can see from here, this is the error message. It's telling me that that VM that I'm attempting to create is not allowed based on the policy I have created, right? And it will give you the exact policy, which is allowed locations, right? If this error message is not too clear to you and you want to really get more like a more clear understanding of what this one is, you can click on explain with Copilot. Copilot essentially simplifies everything for you. So if I click on that, then to explain the error to me. All right, so here we go. It gives me some information about that specific error. So if I scroll a bit up, you can read through that. It will tell you why that error is happening. and then essentially will tell you the same information that you are deploying this in a policy. A policy is allowing this to be created. It tells you the exact policy, and it's based on the fact that it's being restricted. It will give you some information about what you can actually do in that regards as well. So you can easily follow through with the recommendation provided by the Copilot, which is extremely good. So most often when you get certain type of errors, it's hard for you to decipher these errors. But with Copilot now, things are much more easy and clear to really understand. Right, so I'm just going to close the Copilot out and then close this one. So now we understand why this is happening, and we can obviously proceed to create a resource in the allowed location. Now, what we're going to do is just going to go into the Azure Policy and see more information about these specific errors. So if I go back to Policy, and then I click on Compliance. Now, as you can see, this policy have scanned our environment and identify all the resources that are not in compliance with this policy. So when I click on that and scroll down, I'll get all of my resources being analyzed. The one that are not in compliance means that there are existing resources that do not meet this compliance, right? This policy, right? So it highlights those to you, and then obviously, if you want, you can check the reason, the compliance reason, create an exception, or even check the logs as well. All right. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click on activity logs. So this will give you information about what we just created. So we attempted to create a VM just a few minutes ago. So like 3 minutes ago, it gives you that information. And when you click this one, it'll tell you it was denied due to a policy action. All right. So you can instantly find out what policy actually caused this creation to fail. Right. So just that's a very good way you can analyze these sort of policies, whether they are really working or not. Right. So I'm just going to go back. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create an exception for that. So I'll create an exception for the resource group that I want to create this VM. So if I click on create exception, then in here, I can create an exemption, right? So that means even though this is part of the specific scope, it was still going to waiver this. So you have two options: mitigate and also waiver. So the waiver will make sure that it doesn't comply with the policy. So that means you are exempted from it, right? So what I'm going to do is you give that resource exemption a name, and then you select what you really want to do with it. I'll select the waiver, and also give you whether you want to set it as a time bound. At the moment, it's set to exemption does not expire, but you can also define it at time frame to ensure that after that time frame it will expire, and the policy will now be reinforced again. But as a test, I'm just going to leave it as no time bound, and you can give it a description to the exemption, and then you can proceed to create. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to scroll back up and click on the exemption scope. So for the exemption scope, I'm just going to select the resource group I want to exempt from this. So I'm going to exempt lab test. Then I'll click on select. So now the policy read like this: we've exempted this specific resource group, and what means that resource group, it will be allowed through. I mean, you can create all resources in any location whatsoever. No issues, or you're not going to encounter any issue at all. Once you are done with that, then you can proceed to click on next, and then you can even go more granular if you want to. So if I click on add resource selector, I can go even more granular in terms of the resource I want to create exception for. I'll leave that one out, and then I can click on next again, and then review your policy and proceed to click on create. So this will proceed to create an exception, but bear in mind that once the exception is created, as you can see the message there, it can take up to about 30 minutes for this to take effect, right? So that's one thing that you should be aware of, because when you create it and you then instantly jump on to creating of your resource, it might not work instantly. I'll deal with that to you in a momentarily. Right. So once you've created that, the easiest way to identify that this is working is when you probably go back to this lab policy, and then you scroll down. You can search for that specific resource. If you do have a resource group, if you do have resources in that already, you might see that it's coming up as exempted. This policy have not kicked in yet, so I'm still seeing these as non-compliant. How this will change to exempt. So let's attempt to create the resource again, but it's going to fail because we need a bit of time for this to really kick in. So if I come back into my virtual machine and attempt to create a virtual machine here, select that resource group, lab test. You notice that I still get a message, loud location, that indicate that this is being blocked by a policy. If I select East US, that works fine. So give it like 15 minutes. It shouldn't be like anything more than the 30 minutes. So I'm just going to stop and then come back once this is completed. In terms of the time wise, I left it for about 5 minutes. So let's give this a go. So we go back to the policy and then select our policy, which is the allow locations. Now I'm just going to search for the resource again. So lab test. So as you can see now, the compliance state is exempted. So any of the resources that is in that resource group, the lab test resource group, it should now show up as exempted. Right, and as you can see, these are definitely not complying with the policy, because the policy we said was to allow all the creation of resource in East US, but I do have resource in UK South, and then they are still not showing us not in compliance. So that means that the exemption is working as expected. Right. So in terms of the policy wise, I'm not sure whether it has kicked in fully yet, but I'm just going to attempt to create the VM again. So if I go to the VM and click on create new VM, and then I'll select the resource group of lab test. Select that. I'm still getting a message about this violating our lab policy, but I'll proceed anyway. So VM1. And I'll select a Linux device. Okay, so I'm just going to give this one as a test key. Then click on review and create. All right, so validation failed. So I'm just going to go back to here. Just quickly run through this. Make sure everything is in order. Let me quickly change the location. Okay, I didn't get any policy restriction message. So let's see if this works. Right, so there we have it. So it's coming up validation passed. So I can proceed to create the resource. I'm just going to download the key pair. Save the key pair. And as you can see now, I can successfully create my resource with no issues. All right, so the resource has been deployed successfully. So I can go to the resource by clicking on go to resource here. And as you can see, the resource is now up and running. No problems. And this is based in central India. No problems there at all. We can also jump to the policy session here and then go into our allow location and check the activity logs. So as you can see from activity logs, a resource has been created. That's the exception that we created, but it takes a bit of time for this to be updated as well once the new resource has been provisioned. So I hope this video helped you out to create your own policy. If you did and you liked the video, kindly hit the like button, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace out.